Condemnation by world leaders and growing calls for action. Military leaders may have seized full control of Myanmar, but they're facing mounting pressure to hand it back. So what can the international community do to restore democracy in the Southeast Asian nation? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Vinnell. It's been criticised as unacceptable and a serious blow to democracy by the UN. World leaders have been swift in condemning Myanmar's coup. The international community is demanding democracy be restored, and it's calling for the release of the de facto leader Aung San Suu Kyi and other senior figures who have been detained by the military. The ousted party, the National League of Democracy, wants its landslide victory in elections last November recognised. Power is now in the hands of General Min Aung Hlaing, who's appointed his own cabinet. The coup leaders say the takeover is temporary and have promised elections in a year. But that hasn't stopped threats of sanctions, particularly by the US. And the UN Security Council has called for an emergency meeting on the situation on Tuesday.
Primary concern is the people of Myanmar, who are obviously in a state of shock. They're very afraid of what's going on, what may go on. And this is absolutely an outrageous, unacceptable action by the military. The people of Myanmar need to know that we are with them, we stand with them, and we will act for them and with them to address this catastrophe. They are not alone. There should be strong responses from all countries. And then secondly, there needs to be put on the table a series of specific actions that can and should be taken. And then we have to move as strongly as we can to see that the international community takes those actions. Is it going to be a challenge? Yes. Is it going to be easy? No.
US President Joe Biden has threatened to reimpose sanctions on Myanmar, that was formerly known as Burma. In a statement, he said the international community should come together in one voice to press the Burmese military to immediately relinquish the power they've seized, release the activists and officials they've detained. The United States removed sanctions on Burma over the past decade based on progress toward democracy. The reversal of that progress will necessitate an immediate review of our sanction laws and authorities, followed by appropriate action. Well, let's have a look at other countries' reactions. The European Council President, Charles Michel, has condemned the military seizure of power and called for the release of those arrested. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson also criticised the coup, saying the vote of the people must be respected and civilian leaders released. China only said it noted the events and called on all sides to respect the constitution. And Thailand's Deputy Prime Minister, who has close ties with the military, described the coup as a domestic issue. In India, Prime Minister Narendra Modi, an ally of Aung San Suu Kyi, said his country was steadfast in supporting Myanmar's democratic transition. Well, let's bring in our guests. In London, we have Michael Charney, Professor and Chair of Asian and Military History at SOAS University of London and author of A History of Modern Burma. In Illinois is Tharaphi, a Myanmar historian and Associate of Professor at Centre for Asian Studies at Northern Illinois University. In Washington, D.C., Paul Donowitz is Myanmar campaign leader at Global Witness. Big welcome to you all. Thank you for joining us here on Inside Story. I'd like to begin with you, Tharaphi, if I can. The West has roundly condemned the coup. US President Biden is threatening to impose sanctions. But how much leverage does the US really have when it comes to Myanmar and to the generals who are now in power?
This is the only day two of the coup. So the leverage is the highest at the very beginning. So I would say that, the international powers have a lot of leverage at the very beginning because the situation is very confusing. The military or the Temuro itself who staged the coup is confused and scared So that's why they have to convince the international that they are acting according to the constitutions, and they will hand over the power in 1 year. But history again and again show us that they never honor their words. So I think at the very beginning, I think the leverage is the highest.
Michael Charney, what's your take? Do you think that Biden has leverage right now? I mean, it's his first big international challenge, isn't it? His first big foreign policy challenge. How do you think he's likely to respond, given China's cozy relationship with Myanmar and also given all of Joe Biden's talk about leaning on America's allies?
Well, I think that the U.S. does have some leverage. To make it clear, the U.S. doesn't have the unilateral leverage it once had. In PRC, whatever pressure the U.S. puts on Myanmar directly, the PRC will just compensate. Myanmar doesn't need the U.S. so much. Where the U.S. does have leverage is on other ASEAN partners, and where you're actually going to possibly have some stepping back by the military is whatever pressure the U.S. can put on its allies in ASEAN to put pressure through organization on Myanmar.
We'll talk a little bit later about the role of ASEAN. I'd like to bring you in, Paul Donowitz. What about the European Union? EU Parliament President David Sassoli says Europeans are united in condemning the coup. But beyond words of condemnation, what can or should the European Union be doing?
Sure. Thanks for having me. So the EU should be moving quickly to reimpose targeted sanctions on the military and make clear that if they don't return power to the civilian government, that they'll move forward with those actions. But I think it is important that the U.S. move forward in concert with their partners in the EU, the UK, and as Professor said, also in ASEAN, because the U.S. does have limited leverage economically. There's limited U.S. businesses in Myanmar, but there is power in concerted action. I think that's where the U.S. needs to focus, in addition to targeting the military's economic interests.
As you said, Ms. Tan, this is only day 2 of the coup. From what we've seen so far, how the generals are acting, how likely is it, do you think, that they are really going to listen to these international calls for a return to democracy, or the kind of democracy that the country had before this coup?
Well, it will be a combination of the inside democratic forces pressure and the international pressure. International pressure never works on its own alone because, as Mike and Paul already stated, there are conflicted interests among ASEAN, EU, and the US. So I would say the biggest pressure will come domestically. People already rally today, right? The doctors from Mandalay started civil disobedience movement. They are not going to go to work, and the different ministry, different departments, different government offices will put similar pressures. So this, and I would like to emphasize here that we talk about the NLD, taking power by the military, but this is not the NLD on its own. There are different parties as well. NLD won the landslide. We have to keep in mind that this is also democratic elections, even though the government, the military declared that this is unfair. That's why they staged the coup. That all different democratic forces, not just the NLD, particularly democratic forces that were sidelined since 2011, they will come rally behind this anti-military, anti-coup movement. So this is not just NLD versus military alone anymore. This will be all the democratic forces now united against the coup. So the domestic forces will be the power will be the highest. So a combination of these internal and external pressures could work.
Michael Charney, if we look broadly at the impact this will have on the whole region, I mean, there are armed ethnic conflicts on the borders with China and Bangladesh. How might what we're seeing now destabilise the region, and will that spur regional powers to act? What are the calculations that'll be happening regionally now?
Well, right now, this is going to be bad for the peace process dealing with the ethnic minorities, and I think what Tharaphi had mentioned about the military having lied in the past, the idea that the military has returned the country to exactly the same kind of leadership it had before the previous episodes of military rule, means that they can expect less concessions, fewer concessions, and more aggression from the government in the years ahead. So this will be very destabilizing for ethnic minorities. It means that we won't move very far with the repatriation of Rohingya or any resolution to that problem. I don't think there is a issue with regional powers reacting, because within Asia, Japan is trying to outmaneuver China. They aren't going to take the side against the military. China's not going to take sides against the military. Thailand's going to support the military. And Bangladesh can't really do much. It's been trying to do things, but it doesn't have any kind of, it can't force the issue. So I don't expect you'll have a lot of regional change. I think it'll make the situation in Myanmar worse in terms of inter-ethnic and government relations.
Talking there about ethnic minorities, the treatment of ethnic minorities, Paul Donowitz, what concerns do you have about the further erosion of human rights, of freedom of speech, or of potential ethnic violence in the country now that the military is fully in power and says it will be for the next year?
Yeah, gravely concerned that the conflict will increase. There is concern that the military will take control of communication channels. They already did that right after the coup, cutting off communication and mobile networks in Naypyidaw and outside of Yangon. So there's concern that the military will really crack down, that ethnic armed groups will resist that, and the military will try to make advances. So there's real concern that this is going to lead to more violence and more human rights abuses, and really stoke ethnic conflict.
Tharaphi Tan, when we talk about geopolitics and the reverberations of this coup, we obviously cannot leave out China, Myanmar's neighbour. It has invested billions of dollars in Myanmar. How do you see China responding as international calls for the release of Aung San Suu Kyi and for the restoration of democracy, as those calls grow louder?
China has as much interest as the rest of the world. China actually is the first country to visit right after the election. So in January, Chinese foreign minister came to talk to Aung San Suu Kyi and the May outline. So, and actually the relationship between NLD government and China has been warmed. So China has as much interest as the rest of the world to restore democracy. So this we cannot, isolate China and say that they could derail the process if it is in the UN Security Council. So they could walk behind the doors as well. The advantage of China is they could talk to the armed forces, the minority forces as well. So China has a rather quite a lot of leverage inside the country.
OK, Michael Charney, do you agree with that? Is China as interested as the rest of the world in the restoration of democracy? Or what has China's relationship with the military been like in Myanmar?
China has an interest in Burma being stable, and that depends on how they calculate the relationships between the different groups. I would say that probably Tharaphi's right. They would be better off if there was if there was a return of the NLD government. So they would have an investment in that. On the other hand, China has a more cautious approach to its neighbors, so it will be less aggressive, less pushy than the United States might be. It already appears to be the case that they were involved in negotiations between the NLD and the military for a couple of days before the event happened on Monday morning. So China is interested and concerned. It won't push too hard, but it should be on the side of restoring the status quo.
Paul Donowitz, what's your take on the role of China here?
Yeah, I agree with both of our guests that China has a big role to play. They have a very complex and historical economic relationship with Myanmar. They have a lot invested in Myanmar as part of their Belt and Road Initiative, and I think it's actually a big risk for China to side with the military here. There's already a lot of anti-China sentiment in Myanmar among civil society and communities at large, and if they're seen as taking the side of the military, I think it's going to make the Belt and Road Initiative much more challenging if there is a return to democracy in the future. OK, Tharaphi Tan, we touched on it earlier. I want to talk about the Rohingya.
in Bangladesh in particular has sheltered 1 million Rohingya refugees who'd fled violence in Myanmar. What is this going to mean for repatriation efforts? And are those Rohingya who are still in Myanmar at a heightened risk now?
Well, I think I would like to say that, the coup is the violence that minorities like Rohingya, Kachin, Karen, Rakhine face outside of the cities. There's a violence reach these cities through coup or in the name of coup. So all the minorities have been experiences violence, since the quasi-civilian government came to power in 2011. So I want to emphasize that when we talk about restoring democracy, but we also talk about the very mechanism that is safeguarding this democracy, that is the 2008 Constitution. So that democratic infrastructures have been now built on the quagmire. Unless we address that very issue, actually, where international community rallied behind, unless we address that 2008 Constitution, unless we can abolish it, ethnic minorities, will be stay in danger or threatened. And now both the city and the countryside, the Burman and the minorities, are the same and the threat because the same constitution center the power of the military. So that is what we have to recognize.
Mr. Charney, what might this mean for the international pressure to prosecute or hold to account Myanmar's military for the atrocities committed against the Rohingya?
Well, I think we can all agree that the military and the Constitution is the problem. We disagree on Aung San Suu Kyi's NLD's culpability in defending what happened with the Rohingya. But what I think we might also agree on is that whole issue has hurt Aung San Suu Kyi's credibility, whether they agreed with her or not. That it has hurt her reputation as an international human rights icon. It has hurt her reputation regarding her support of democracy. So I think it'll be there will be you can build an international coalition, but it won't be quite as strong as it might have been in the 1990s and early 2000s before the participation of the new government because of the Rohingya issue.
Paul Donowitz, beyond economic sanctions, what else could the international community be doing? I mean, would arms embargo, would that make a difference?
Yeah, a global arms embargo would be a good first step. And the UN Security Council, as you noted, is meeting, I believe, today to discuss Myanmar under the UK chairmanship. So we are definitely supporting an arms embargo. I think that there are other things that the international community can do. I think one is speaking in one voice to say that this is not acceptable, that the military needs to release the political detainees, it needs to restore the parliament, and needs to reinstate the rule of law. And otherwise, I think that there are things that the international community can do in terms of the business community, in terms of social media, ensuring that, for example, Facebook does not allow the military to use its platform to promote itself and its activities. There have been calls for that as well.
Tharaphi, just following on from that, according to the World Bank, Singapore was the largest direct foreign investor in Myanmar last year. Hong Kong was second. So how might the coup impact direct foreign investment in Myanmar, and who stands to lose the most?
That's, well, like Paul was saying, there are two things, right? The same old card sanctions. But now technology has a very quick repercussions against the military. So I think it is one thing that international community can pressure right away because, after 2017 Rohingya crisis, the Facebook banned a lot of military accounts and they had to migrate to Russian servers, right? So, and also a lot of people inside are worried that the disinformation campaign will start by the military, right, to instigate violence and also to crush, the now emerging disobedience movement. So this is the very quick action the international community take. The sanctions are very limited. The effect for me, I can not stay open a bank account, at a nearby city in the U.S., because of my citizenship status. So they are actually stay in effect. They are not lifted. So in that sense, it will be there will be limited, consequence.
Mm-hmm. Michael Charney, the UN Special Rapporteur on Myanmar was actually on this program yesterday saying that the military needs to hear the international community will not sit idly by and let this happen. But what can it do, particularly in the context of the UN Security Council? I mean, will China and Russia just look to shield the generals of Myanmar?
Well, yeah, I don't think that you'll see action from the Security Council. The Russia and the PRC will boycott, will veto any collective move towards collective action there. The only thing I think that the biggest leverage, the biggest thing the international community can do is do things like freeze the bank accounts of generals and their families, put pressure on companies where they do on countries where they do banking, targeted sanctions against individuals. These kinds of things work because the underlying rules of this game is that Min Aung Hlaing wanted to secure his own economic future. Other generals want to secure the futures of their families. They're heavily involved in the economy. China has a lot of investment in this too because it wants One Belt, One Road, as mentioned earlier, to work. So whatever you can do to influence directly hit the leaders, directly hit the policymakers, their families, this kind of thing, that's going to have the biggest effect.
Tharaphi, what is the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN, likely to do here? What are the regional calculations for ASEAN?
ASEAN have been saying that this is the internal affairs, right? And we have to remember that Thai itself had the coup in 2014, and Biden administration said, they share the interest in Indo-Pacific, so they offer to cooperate. So, as time goes on, the violence, the coup has been normalized, right? So that is what I'm worried. And so what the international community do, in the immediate aftermath of the coup is making sure that, the civil movements would not be crushed. I'm real worried that there will be real blood on the streets because the tanks have been circulating, in front of my mom's house, in Mandalay, everywhere. So this is the real physical threat that every citizen is facing right now.
Paul Donowitz, the military's power, even as the country was apparently moving toward democracy, it's been on display for a very long time. And its power was enshrined in the 2008 constitution, crafted by the military, which provided a legal channel, didn't it, for the military to reimpose direct military rule. So is it fair for all of this outrage to be happening now from the international community when one could say the writing has been on the wall for a very long time?
Well, that's true that the Constitution, Section 417 and 418, does provide an avenue for this action. That being said, this is obviously an action against the will of the people of Myanmar, against the over 83% of people who voted for the NLD in the last election. So I don't think that we can say that this is a purely legal move by the military. And I do have to say that, I want to emphasize the grave threat that civil society and the people of Myanmar are under right now. We have colleagues who are in hiding. We have, as Tharaphi mentioned, there are tanks on the streets. Aung San Suu Kyi just called for people to come out and to resist the military. So there's a real danger here that, based on past experiences, that we could see bloodshed and violence. So I think there's a responsibility on the part of the international community, on the part of China and other ASEAN neighbors, to really call for the military to exercise restraint and to abide by the rule of law here.
We are nearing the end of the programme. Very quickly, Michael Charney, I could see you nodding there. I want to end with putting that same question to you. Was the writing on the wall in Myanmar?
We have a disagreement about this because I do think it was on the wall and writing was on the wall. And I think the NLD and the Aung San Suu Kyi have some responsibility for not having, we'll disagree about this, but have some responsibility for accepting that constitution. The thing that worries me the most, now is them banning flights in and out of the country for the next 4 or 5 months, so until end of May. So we don't know what's going to happen to civil society groups and leaders and that kind of thing on the ground. So that's what worries me most, actually.
A big thank you to all of our guests. We have to leave it there for time. Michael Charney, Tharaphi and Paul Donowitz. We appreciate it. And thank you too for watching. You can see the programme again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, you can go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Vinnell, and from the whole team here, bye-bye for now.